On this episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show, we talk about some of our priorities when starting an off-season with our athletes.
The Ask Mike Reinold Show. Helping people feel better, move better, and perform better.
Before we get to the podcast, I wanted to make sure you knew about my free online course on the Introduction to Performance Therapy and Training. If you want to learn how to get started optimizing and enhancing performance, this is the course for you. Head to mikereinold.com/performance to sign up today. Welcome back, everybody, to the latest episode of the Ask Mike Reinold Show. I am here up in Boston, champion PT and performance with amazing crew. I like saying amazing. I say amazing all the time, but here answering all your questions, physical therapy, sports performance, fitness, career advice, anything you want to talk about, head to mikereinold.com, click on that podcast link and fill out the form so we can answer your question on a future episode. So let's see, who do we have here today? We have Dewesh Podell, Lenny Macrina, Lisa Lowe. Is it official?
Lisa Lowe.
I think it's official.
It's official.
So what's that Lisa Loeb song from 1991? Stay?
I have no idea.
I'm going to sing that to you at all times.
Yeah,
So
I did that a couple weeks ago.
Welcome. God, that's disappointing that Lenny and I have the same personality, but or humor. But Lisa, congrats on the new official married name, Lisa Lowe. Welcome officially to the podcast. Dan Pope, Kevin Coughlin, and Lenny, who do we have for students today? I think we have some new ones, right?
We have some glorious students, just glorious. Amazing. They're amazing students. We have Kim Lay from First University College in somewhere, I think New York, upstate New York, maybe in Pennsylvania. I don't even know, somewhere in the Atlantic. We have Morgan Kennedy from Findlay University in Findlay, Ohio. We have Zach Atwood from Wayne State. Do you know Zach doesn't know the difference between a lefty or a righty golfer?
Other than which side they hit the ball?
Describes it as that way. You hit that way. It was an interesting conversation yesterday. So hopefully your friends listen to this and you guys can talk about that.
Interesting. I feel like we have a very eclectic group of colleges and universities this time, right?
We do, yeah.
So, awesome. We're good. All right. So who's up first? Who wants to read the first question? I don't know. Oh, Morgan, of course. Just jumping in there. I love it, Morgan. That's it. Morgan's taking the lead on this one. I like it. What do we got for a question today, Morgan?
Today, actually, Kim is going to be doing the first question. I'm just in charge of the computer.
Oh, okay. I mean, you popped up and got like super excited. I was like, you were like elbowing out the other students, though. I thought that was cool. But all right, what do we got, Kim?
Sean from Florida asks, with the start of the baseball season, off-season approaching, I was curious what things you would initially focus on within us ending a long season and starting their off-season training.
Awesome. I thought that was a really good question too, Sean. I appreciate you submitting that one there. Obviously, you use the word baseball, right? Because, baseball off season's coming, but I just thought it was a great question just to talk about like what we do, at the start of an athlete's off season, right? Because you could argue what we're about to do in this first beginning phase is going to set the tone and really set the foundation for the rest of the off season and what we can do. So, I think we're in the same boat as you, Sean. We started to have some of our athletes start rolling in, and we started having these conversations. Dewesh and I was just having this conversation yesterday about one of our athletes and how we're going to phase out his off season. So, Dewey, you want to start this one off, I guess, and see where the conversation takes us. But like when an athlete's coming into you at the start of their off season, and we know they just had a long season, and we're about to start this period where we can focus on them. What are your initial goals for that beginning phase? I think that's a really cool question.
Yeah, for sure. And before I dive into kind of what we would do, the few things that I would consider for sure is a little bit of, what they did during the summer, what their volume was like. Obviously, we got a lot of kids that play summer ball, but some kids don't, right? So that's going to change the way that we approach things just slightly. We might not worry as much about, let's say, normalizing the athlete, kind of bringing, movement variability as like a primary objective early on. if they haven't played summer ball, right? If they've been rotating, throwing, hitting all summer, they did that in the spring. Obviously we got to probably take a little bit of a break from, being super, super transverse plane and frontal plane. So we typically tend to do is early on, we focus a little bit more on gaining movement quality, movement competency, move a little bit more in the sagittal plane just to kind of get them away from doing that same repetitive rotation over and over again. And then we definitely prioritize, strength as our foundation early on. Now, the cool thing with what we're currently doing is, we've started to apply a little bit of like sports science testing stuff and start building some force velocity profiles for our athletes. And that does change things a little bit. So instead of kind of going with the conventional wisdom of saying, all right, we're going to start back with a strength phase, maybe even like a hypertrophy phase, strength phase, and then kind of developing into a little bit more of the power model. We might have some more advanced athletes that we know their profile super well. So if they're already super, super strong, right, and that's not the big low hanging fruit for them, we might honestly glaze over that a little bit more. We might just kind of focus on building decent capacity for strength and then just jump right into speed and power stuff because we know that that's what they're going to get better doing. So that's where things get a little bit different than, what's conventionally done from like a hypertrophy, strength, power.
What you're saying though is you're still going to start that initial phase with a primary focus probably on a strength-based program, but depending on maybe where they are in that force development profile, maybe that phase is just a little quicker for somebody that has a great amount of strength or didn't lose strength in season, right, and is ready to progress faster. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly.
Nice.
It.
That's great. And I really like what you said at the beginning too, about like applying, like, what did they do this summer? Right. And, this is a lens, by the way, that you can use for any sport, right? We're talking baseball because that was what Sean said, but, theoretically you can take this with any athlete is, like what Dewey said was think about what they've been doing in their competitive sport for months on end right now. And think like we may have to take a break from some of those movement patterns and work outside those planes a little bit, right? We have to get away from rotation. For example, if you're a baseball player, we may want to just get, out of that for just a teeny bit in this beginning section. So I like that. What else? Anybody else have, thoughts? Like, how about like, for us, like Len, like, obviously we have a bit of like the performance therapy, like slant to this, but like from your lens there as like the performance therapist, when somebody's coming back after a long season, what are you looking at?
Yeah, I mean, Dewey did a great job, and we had an athlete come back this week or last week. So we're constantly talking to me, you and him about this guy and others that will come in, but we're, in my hands, I'm looking at, hopefully I've seen him before and have some baseline on him. And that is often the case, fortunately for us, but sometimes we don't. And so I want to see range of motion numbers. I want to see total range of motion. So ER/IR ratios and total range of motion, and just see what we're at. As we know, throwing, you lose internal rotation over a season. So was he taking care of his shoulder and getting arm care during the season to maintain his motion? And maybe not, which is fine, or towards the end, he just kind of faded. And so we got to figure that out. And then strength profile. So we do a lot of handheld dynamometry with our pitchers too. So with our baseball players, so ERI ratios of strength, and then just, cuff and deltoid, see how strong they are bilaterally. And again, try to compare to a baseline of where they were at some point, and at least create a baseline, if not, and then go from there, and then communicate with the strength coach how they can incorporate some of their arm care stuff into their program, or it's up to us as PTs to do some of the soft tissue stuff and restore some of their motion and get some of that local strength back in their cuff, that we would do, and some of the dynamic stability.
So I like that. So combining Lenny and Dewesh right now, I like this. So Dewesh is curious on what their workload was for the summer, so that way we can build a program based on that. Lenny wants to look at how their body tolerated that workload, right? So, we always say with our athletes, like you play sports, especially day in and day out, you usually end up getting tight and you get tired, right? So we look at your mobility, we look at your strength, we look at how that applies, right? So, again, Lenny was super focused on baseball, but again, if you have a football athlete, a hockey athlete, think about the activities that they did, right? And where would they be tight? Where would they be weak, or tired, whatever. And that has to be, the beginning for you, right? Like we can't jump right to power training if somebody has a mobility restriction or they have a poor movement screen or they, maybe they have isolated weakness in areas specific to their sport. So I think that's a good basis. So what else, Lisa, what do your rowers look like when they first come see you? Cause I think that's like, end of a long season, like what do they look like and how does that change what you do at the beginning?
Tight and tired and sore.
I can't, right. But,
yeah.
but I think that's the good point though, is that everybody's essentially tight and tired. It's just what's tight and what's tired for your sport. Right.
Yeah. And I was, as we've been answering this question, I just get really excited for off season. Like I get really excited for winter training because it's like, I feel like on the water season, I'm always just helping people stay on the water. But like in the off season, you can actually like more so fix a problem. And so I always just get super stoked for actually having that opportunity. And this year, all the rowers that are coming in here, I'm going to actually do some more solid like strength and range of motion testing with them so that they can have those more concrete goals in the weight room or with me of like, what are we trying to change through the off season, which to me is almost more exciting than competition season because it's like how do you actually get better? So
I love that. And that, I mean, perfect build off what Lenny said. I love when episodes come together like this for a podcast too. So Lenny's looking at how'd you tolerate those workloads for the season? Now Lisa's saying, okay, well, where are you now? I want to create objectives over the course of your off season that we can get you to peak performance. Right. So, and we talk about this a lot, like with our, champion performance kind of like thought process that we use. But if this is baseline, right, oftentimes like, I don't know in the video, what's left and right, if it's reversed, but oftentimes like you get below baseline. So we try a lot to get you back to baseline, but then in the off season, we need to get you past baseline. So we have to not just restore your performance, but then we have to optimize it and then enhance it. Right. And that's how those steps build off each other right there. So I love that approach. So Dan's going to take this episode off because his athletes don't have off seasons, right? If you're not training, you're losing. Right. So
yeah. I mean, I was going to say, I won't say a ton, take up a ton of time here, but that's huge. I mean, I'm guilty of this, and a lot of folks I work with are guilty of this. They don't really have seasons, but I think for especially like a collegiate athlete that is really, really, really into the sport, we see a ton of youth athletics that we see a lot of overuse injuries. Off season is an important time to kind of calm down a little bit, right? If you do have an injury, it's a time to relax and build up slowly the course of time. For me, I was just like Lisa, super excited about the off season, probably too much so. So I'd come off of like a high volume, high intensity, mentally exhausting season. I'm like, all right, let's hit this 100% the next day. We're just going to lift heavy now, which I don't know if that's the right mentality either. And obviously as an athlete, it's good to want to push, but you do have to settle back a little bit and take some time and get the body to heal and relax. And if you have an injury, this is a major opportunity to get that to go down, and feel better and build back.
I love that too. And that's one thing we talk about at the beginning too, is like, hey, all right, what'd you deal with this season? What injuries did you lose any time? What's aching you now? What was an issue in the season that maybe it's not symptomatic right now, but maybe there's some lingering, suboptimal findings maybe on your exam that we can dig in there. I always tell people that too. This might be the most important month of the off season, even though we're doing the least amount of work, because if you don't get the things that are suboptimal addressed now, then you're never going to like maximize the ability to reach that peak performance later in the off season. So it's like super important, right? So Kev, what do you got?
Yeah, so I was just gonna say that the season seems to be a grind where we're doing very specific things, and the off season's a good time to kind of look at all the specific things we've been doing and try to turn the person back into an athlete and work on whatever skills or drills that we weren't able to work on during the season. So, kind of keep their whole athlete profile in mind, like Duash was saying, and try to get them back to that full athlete that we want them to be going into their next season.
I love that. And, using the specific example, the player that we just mentioned that just came back, I think that was a good example. He was dealing with something, and his training took a hit, right? So he actually started like plateauing and then almost like declining towards the end of the season. And we got away from some of those things. It's almost like we were in just damage control mode towards the end of his season, and he wasn't athletic enough, right? And then you start to deteriorate over time. So awesome. So all right, great episode. I mean, we could talk for 4 hours on this topic, which is great. But I think, like, you know, good summary of stuff is, you know, have your athletes come in, find out how their season went, right? How did they have any major injuries? How'd their body hold up? And then we want to establish this assessment process of where they are. What were their workloads? How did they handle them? What's suboptimal, right? What do we need to clean up in this first phase so that way we can really build upon that in the future? I think this is the most important part of the off season for me, is trying to get their body reset so that way we have a foundation to build on in the future. So awesome episode. Thanks so much, Sean, for that question. If you have a question like that, head to MikeReinold.com, click on that podcast link, and be sure to subscribe. iTunes, is it not iTunes anymore? I don't even, Apple, Spotify, whatever.
Or Apple
Spotify's growing, by the way. And this isn't an ad for Spotify. Spotify's growing. And you look at the numbers going up. But anyway, off topic. Sorry. But anyway, appreciate it. See you on the next episode.